What started as a fight ended as a legend in the making. When Kendal hit that final move, the ref's hand hit 3, and the entire Evolve crowd lost their minds. You have to understand what the air feels like before a match like that. It's not about the noise from the crowd, it's about the silence backstage. Everyone knew the story. Kendal Grey, the fiery rookie with impossible momentum, against Drew McIntyre, the gatekeeper. And at ringside, the architect of it all, Randy Orton. The plan was simple, a classic wrestling narrative. A test, a moment for the new generation to prove they could hang with the established kings. But stories have a way of writing themselves, especially when the ink is real emotion. Drew walked through the curtain with that stoic professionalism he carries so well, but his eyes were tight. He knew his job was to guide the match, to keep the structure intact. Kendal, on the other hand, had a different energy. It wasn't arrogance, but a raw, unfiltered belief that she belonged there. She wasn't playing a character. She was living a truth she had fought for. And Randy was just watching. He stood by the commentary table, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. People thought it was part of the act, the cold, calculating viper observing his plan unfold. But what we saw, those of us who knew him, was something else. It was the stillness of a man who had been at the top for 20 years, wondering if the fire he was trying to pass on was about to become an inferno that would consume them all. The bell rang, but the real match hadn't started yet. The initial lockup felt deliberate. It wasn't the explosive start the fans expected. It was a grind. Drew, using his size and experience, leaned into Kendal, testing her foundation, her resolve. He wasn't just executing moves, he was asking questions with every push, every hold. Are you ready for this? Can you handle the weight? Kendal's response wasn't about overpowering him, it was about endurance. She absorbed the pressure, her expression never breaking from intense focus. She was communicating back, I can take whatever you've got. From the outside, Orton's presence was a shadow looming over the ring. Every camera cut to him seemed to reinforce his control. He was the puppet master. But if you watched his hands, you'd see the story. He would clench and unclench his fists, not for show, but in a small, repetitive motion. It was a nervous tick, a tell that betrayed the calm exterior. He wasn't just watching a match, he was watching a legacy, his legacy, being interpreted by two people who were not him. The first few minutes were a masterclass in professional wrestling. Safe, snug, believable. But there was a tension underneath it all, a fragile piece that felt like it was one mistake away from shattering. It was the feeling of walking on thin ice, knowing that the monster was waiting in the cold, dark water below. The crowd felt the tension, but they mistook it for good storytelling. It was much more than that. The first crack wasn't a move. It was a sound. Kendal, fighting out of a corner, threw a forearm that was meant to be a glancing blow, something to create separation. But it landed flush. The sound echoed through the arena, a sharp, distinct crack of skin on skin that was louder than any scripted effect. It wasn't reckless, just real. Drew stumbled back, more from surprise than pain, and for a split second, the performance stopped. He touched his jaw, his eyes narrowing. The crowd roared, thinking it was a turning point in the match. They didn't see the subtle shift in his body language. The professional in him was assessing the situation, but the fighter in him felt the sting of disrespect. He looked over at Orton, almost for guidance, but Randy's face was stone. There was no nod, no signal. Only silence. That silence was the problem. It left Drew alone in the ring with a decision to make. Stick to the script or send a message back. Kendal, sensing the change, didn't back down. She moved in, pressing the advantage. That was her instinct, the thing that got her here. But in that moment, she wasn't just fighting Drew McIntyre anymore. She was fighting the unspoken rules, the delicate balance of an industry built on trust. And she was doing it right in front of the one man whose trust was everything and whose patience was wearing dangerously thin. Randy's anger didn't manifest as a yell. It was quieter, far more menacing. He took a single step toward the ring, and then another, his walk losing its theatrical swagger. It became a prowl. The commentary team, trying to play their part, suggested the Viper was getting impatient with his protégé's struggle. But what we saw was a man whose carefully constructed world was being threatened. For 20 years, Randy Orton was the master of control. He dictated the pace, the emotion, the violence. Now a rookie was ad-libbing the story, and his chosen enforcer, Drew, was hesitating. The hesitation was the key. Drew looked at Kendal, then at Orton, then back at Kendal. He was caught between his duty to the match and his instinct for self-preservation. He knew the look in Randy's eyes. It wasn't the character, it was the man who held grudges, the man whose temper was the stuff of backstage legend. In that moment of hesitation, the entire dynamic of the match shifted. It was no longer a contest between Kendal and Drew. It became a test of loyalty between Drew and Orton, with Kendal as the unwitting catalyst. The arena was buzzing, alive with the drama. They felt the realism, the raw emotion. They thought they were watching a great performance. The truth was, the performance had just ended, and reality was about to take its place. The unraveling began when Orton got on the apron. He didn't shout instructions. He just stared at Drew. It was a cold, piercing gaze that said everything the microphone couldn't. End this. Now. The referee, caught in the middle, started his count, trying to restore order. But there was no order left. Drew, now visibly conflicted, went to grab Kendal, but his movements were stiff, unnatural. He was thinking, not reacting. And in wrestling, when you think, you lose. Kendal, running on pure adrenaline, ducked under his arm and hit a spinning back kick to his midsection. It was a move born of desperation, not design. Drew doubled over, winded. The crowd exploded. They saw an underdog rally. We saw a man trapped. Orton's reaction was immediate. He slammed his hand on the ring apron, a sharp, violent sound that cut through the noise. It wasn't for the crowd. It was for Drew, a public display of disappointment, of fury. That was the moment Randy stopped being a mentor and became the Viper again. Not the character, but the predator. He slid into the ring, ignoring the referee completely. The match was officially off the rails. Backstage, the producers were scrambling. The director was screaming into the headsets. What's happening? Is this in the script? But there was no script anymore. Just 3 people in a ring, and a legend coming undone, live, for the whole world to see. Chaos is a strange thing to witness up close. It doesn't feel loud, it feels cold. As Orton entered the ring, the energy changed from a wrestling match to something unsettlingly real. The referee tried to step in his way, a brave but foolish gesture. Randy didn't even look at him. He just shoved him aside. Not a wrestler's push, but an angry, dismissive shove. The ref stumbled back, his authority gone. All eyes were on the 3 figures in the center of the ring. Drew was still catching his breath, but his eyes were wide with a different kind of pain now. The pain of knowing he had failed his mentor. Kendal, exhausted but defiant, stood her ground, ready for a 2-on-1 assault. She was prepared for the fight, but not for what happened next. Randy walked right past her. He got face to face with Drew, his expression a mask of contempt. The words were inaudible to the cameras, but the intent was clear. It was a dressing down, a verbal evisceration. He was dismantling Drew McIntyre in front of 20,000 people, not as a storyline beat, but as a personal rebuke. This was the point of no return. The curtain had been pulled back, and the audience was seeing something they were never supposed to see. The raw, unfiltered anger of a man who had forgotten he was on camera, a king furious that his castle was crumbling around him. The finish. It wasn't a finish. It was an accident. While Orton was verbally tearing into Drew, he made a critical mistake. He turned his back on Kendal. For him, in that moment, she didn't exist. She was an afterthought, the cause of the problem, but not the focus of his rage. His entire world had shrunk to his own sense of betrayal. Kendal, seeing the opening, did the only thing she could. She ran. She launched herself forward, not with a planned move, but with everything she had left. She was aiming for Orton, a desperate attempt to neutralize the biggest threat. But as she flew through the air, Drew, reacting on pure instinct to protect his partner, his mentor, stepped in her path. The collision was awkward, a mess of limbs and momentum. Drew wasn't braced for it. He staggered backward, tripping over his own feet, and fell. And Kendal, tangled with him, fell too. She landed on top of him, her shoulder pinning his, her body a dead weight. It was a clumsy, chaotic heap. No impact, no grace. Just a tangle of bodies. The referee, having recovered from the shove, saw it. A wrestler's shoulders were on the mat. His professional duty kicked in, overriding the chaos. He dropped to his knees and his hand hit the canvas. 1. The crowd gasped, a wave of confusion washing over them. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. 2. Orton finally turned around, his eyes widening in disbelief as he saw the scene. He had been so consumed by his own anger that he lost track of the game. He started to lunge forward to break the pin, but he was a fraction of a second too late. The referee's hand came down for the third and final time. 3. The bell rang, a sharp, piercing sound that seemed to shock everyone into silence. For one full second, the entire Evolve arena was completely quiet. It was an unnatural, deafening stillness. 20,000 people, the commentary team, the wrestlers in the ring, and everyone watching backstage, all frozen in a shared state of shock. Did that just happen? Then, the silence broke. It wasn't a cheer at first. It was a roar of confusion, of disbelief, of pure, unadulterated chaos. Kendal Grey, the rookie, had just pinned Drew McIntyre. She hadn't hit her finisher. She hadn't out-wrestled a giant. She had won because a legend lost his temper. The camera zoomed in on Randy's face. And that's the image nobody will ever forget. It wasn't the scowl of a villain whose plan had failed. It was the blank, hollow look of a man who had just realized the mask had cracked, and everyone had seen the truth underneath. He had lost control, and in doing so he had created a new legend. The immediate aftermath was a blur of motion and noise. Kendal's music hit, but it felt out of place, a soundtrack to a movie nobody understood. She rolled off Drew, her own expression a mix of exhaustion and utter bewilderment. She didn't celebrate. She just sat there, on her knees, trying to process a victory that felt more like a car crash. Drew slowly sat up, not looking at Kendal, but staring at Orton, his face a portrait of professional shame. And Randy. Randy just stood there, motionless, as the chaos erupted around him. He didn't attack anyone. He didn't throw a tantrum. He simply watched the scene he had created, as if he were a ghost at his own funeral. Backstage, it was controlled panic. Agents were speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Officials were trying to get answers from the referee, who could only say, "His shoulders were down. I had to count." There was no one to blame, not really. You can't script human emotion. You can't rehearse a genuine loss of control. The story that was supposed to be about Kendal Grey's courageous effort had become a story about Randy Orton's public breakdown. As she was finally helped to her feet, her hand raised by the referee, the crowd was still a mess of conflicting reactions. Some cheered her name, some booed the finish, but most were just watching Orton, waiting for him to do something. But he did nothing. He just let the moment hang in the air, a testament to his own fallibility. When you strip away the lights, the music, and the roar of the crowd, all you're left with is the truth. The story told that night wasn't about a championship or a rivalry. It was about pressure. It was about the crushing weight of being a legend for 2 decades, of being expected to be the Viper every single night, without fail. Randy Orton didn't lose to Kendal Grey or Drew McIntyre. He lost to the ghost of his own legacy, the impossible standard he had set for himself. The anger that boiled over wasn't born from that one match. It had been simmering for years, fueled by injuries, by expectations, by the relentless march of time. In the quiet of the locker room later, there were no cameras, no fans. There was just the heavy silence of what had transpired. People gave him a wide berth, not out of fear, but out of a kind of respect for the pain he was clearly in. That night, Kendal Grey's career was made, but it came at a cost that wasn't hers to pay. It served as a stark, uncomfortable reminder to everyone. These titans we watch, these larger-than-life characters we invest in, are, in the end, just people. And sometimes, under the brightest lights and the most intense pressure, the mask cracks.